we're going to stay in disaster mode, but to the project that you heard a little bit about yesterday from Stephanie during the NAPC update, but Lisa Craig is the consultant NAPC is working with on this, and she's going to give us more details on what to do in the disaster.
Great. I appreciate this opportunity. I want to thank Megan and Stephanie. I think you all can see my screen. Megan, I can nod if that's the case. Great, fabulous. Really appreciate too Lindsay's presentation, because we did have Main Street involved in essence on our advisory committee as well for this similar initiative being run through National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, as you heard about yesterday from Stephanie. And I also want to thank specifically Jennifer Wellock, who is our technical resource person on this. My presentation today is a much abbreviated version of what we will be doing on a regular basis as part of the camp disaster training module. Just to make sure everyone is aware, anyone who is participating in a camp, and that would be, you know, Historic Preservation Commission members, obviously, which is our primary audience. But as part of camp, we often have Main Street members represented, as well as others that are in the preservation community in general. So we invite you to share this information about this series of courses with those in your community who really need to know more about disaster planning and recovery for historic communities. Much as you heard from Lindsay, this is a partnership with the Park Service. We are in a position, I being in California, and just a little background in my firm, the Craig Group provides preservation planning and policy assistance to historic communities. Currently, I'm working with New Bern, Nantucket, and St. Augustine on resilience and adaptation planning efforts, as well as the Delaware SHPO on strategic planning. So we really are a full service planning firm with representatives throughout the country. But in working with NAPC, I'm a proud NAPC member and a Main Street member. I encourage all of you to become members of these two valuable historic preservation-based organizations. I'm really glad to see NAPC moving forward with this kind of training in a cohesive partnering way with the Park Service. We had a 21-member multi-agency organization, and yes, we had state and federal representatives from SHPO offices, from emergency management agencies on that particular advisory team. We ended up with 8 courses with options of half and whole day and single course workshops. And the initial training will be hosted through the camp process by SHPOs or CLGs in Harvey, Irma, and Maria disaster declared states, with others to follow. There's some information at the end. If you're interested in having this training, please do get in touch with Stephanie Pohl, who is monitoring this particular presentation, and she will help you get that moving forward. So I'm going to go through the rest of this fairly quickly if I can, and be happy to take questions at the end. So this is National Preparedness Month, by the way. It just happened to be September. So as you can see in the 2019 National Preparedness Report, it is a priority for all states to be able to be prepared for an event. So we encourage you all to look at this as an opportunity not only to help your historic communities, but also the individuals who work in those agencies. I always talk about the importance of family first, of people first, and to know that an individual working in a historic preservation office, whether it's a local or state level, has to be concerned first and foremost with their own family emergency plan, because then you can focus on your agency and the needs of your community. So I'm always lockstep with my emergency management partners and say, please prepare that family emergency plan for home. But for purposes of our discussion, I'm going to talk today a little bit about preparedness and recovery planning, the different disaster types, the types of planning and recovery efforts, community priorities, some tools and resources, materials and methods, and most importantly for all of us who have worked in certified local governments and Main Street programs, I've worn both hats, the important role of the Historic Preservation Commission. I'm going to talk first with a couple of case studies based on projects I'm either aware of or have worked with specifically. This is actually a planning workshop in St. Augustine, Florida, where all of the agencies were involved and took a front and center role, working with key decision makers, their mayors, their other public agency, including county representatives from emergency management, to begin drafting the framework for their recovery plan. But I'm most involved with Annapolis because that is where my background in mitigation and historic preservation began. About 2013, we developed in partnership with our CLG coordinator, who played a very strong role, Nell Zeal, good friend and colleague that I worked with at the National Trust. We knew that disasters needed to be anticipated, and we began planning in Annapolis by creating a significant public awareness and branding effort, the Weather It Together program. So I always encourage communities I work with to really understand their identity, their brand, and to come up with something that speaks specifically to the residents of that community about the uniqueness and character of their historic and natural resources. The city did amend a standing hazard mitigation plan, which is a strong recommendation I make, and that is using your comprehensive or hazard mitigation plan as a tool upon which to build a cultural resource-based mitigation or adaptation planning effort. Another example is currently underway in Colorado, where the National Historic Landmark Chautauqua is working with the Historic Preservation Office in Boulder to create a sustainability and resilience strategy for that National Historic Landmark. So you can do this at the property level as well as at the community level. And then there are other tools. We've been seeing so much about Charleston in the news and the concern for flooding. It's a consistent issue, much as it was with us in Annapolis. Historic Charleston Foundation has played a leading role with the city of Charleston, not only developing design guidelines, but also taking it to the next level and having those kinds of expertise that is represented by the Dutch Dialogues organization to really understand and conceptualize the issue of living with water and a new future for that community. At the same time, I've been privileged to work on about 5 Keeping History Above Water conferences. We did one most recently in Nantucket. It was a public workshop. Along with that, we also did a community value survey, something that I've developed that I think is measured well what places really matter in communities, not just the historic district itself, but those individual places. Sometimes it's that third place, that gathering place that's so important in Main Street communities. So we really worked with the communities in Nantucket, Annapolis, St. Augustine to understand their priorities for what must be saved and recovered in the event of a disaster. And we were fortunate to work with the University of Florida and their Preservation Institute in Nantucket program to do 3D modeling and visualization. What will Nantucket look like in the year 2100 or the year 2065? And as you can see, it's not a pretty picture. Portsmouth has done the same type of analysis based on a GIS system rather than 3D, it's 2-dimensional. But an important first step, they've done a vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning initiative to understand what they need to prioritize in terms of their planning efforts. And then St. Augustine, Resilient Heritage in the Oldest City is the name of that planning initiative. And it is a toolkit, much as we heard from Lindsay, the need to develop a toolkit. This one is really focused on public policy. So we've completed that toolkit as well as assessment of 3 model projects in terms of city-owned buildings that they could begin adaptation strategies on, and that may be relevant to how other historic property owners in that city treat their historic buildings as they are adapting them to a future of resilience. So I'm going to talk quickly, very quickly, about terminology and disaster types. As you can see, I've identified here 5 disaster types. In the training, we go into a little bit more detail about that. This actually happens to be the Oroville Dam, which had a major problem with the spillway during heavy storms a few years back. And unfortunately, I hate to say right now, it's now being quickly approached with fire concerns. So you may have multiple disasters affecting, as we now all have experienced with COVID, multiple disasters affecting a community. Natural disaster is geological. Listed here are a number of those. Here's a building being demolished in the Marina District after the Loma Prieta quake. Natural disaster from weather. Crisfield is a community in Maryland on the Chesapeake. It was hit very hard by Sandy. And then obviously on the right, Ellicott City, many of you may recognize these images, hit twice with what unfortunately the governor termed a 1,000-year event, twice in 18 months with that same event. And that was a Main Street community as well. Floods and heavy rains. Florence hit New Bern, North Carolina on the left. And on the right, this is a community in Missouri, actually, that got hit with flooding in a Main Street neighborhood. And then, I'm going to bypass this one because it's pretty dramatic, but this is what we're seeing and have seen in fires in California in particular, and Oregon obviously now under blaze, unfortunately. So it's a big issue. But COVID, we are all having to adapt to this new environment, this pandemic. And one of the slides I'll show you at the end gives you some sense of how communities are starting to kind of pivot in terms of how they're handling meetings and the like. So it is a major impact on small business, our Main Street communities, and preservation, because without viable, vital Main Street businesses, historic buildings sit vacant and underutilized. And that is not to the value of historic preservation that we all aspire. I'm not going to get into a lot of terminology, just saying there are a lot of terms to become knowledgeable about. We often use resiliency as a term. I just want to pull out the fact that that is the capacity of a social build or natural environment to bounce back and return to normalcy following a disaster. I like to use the phrase I first heard that was published in the Sendai framework for disaster management and recovery many years ago, build back better. And that's how we are positioning the training and the future of resilience in our historic communities. In terms of disaster planning and recovery plan types, I'm going to move quickly into that discussion. The important thing to understand, as a recent graph really well demonstrates, is that communities who become more risk tolerant really begin with initial risk assessments. Then they move through the typical planning processes, looking at their frameworks for the emergency response, for disaster management, for hazard mitigation and local mitigation planning, developing adaptation or climate action plans, developing elements within their comprehensive plan to talk about historic preservation. Many states, I've recently come from a conference in Connecticut, and they have a terrific historic preservation plan at the state level that has a whole goal relevant to disaster planning and resilience. So it does start at the state level. I was fortunate to have that in Maryland, and I know many other CLGs are appreciative of the fact that their state plans have disaster planning and resilience built in. And so plans do need action and funding. Jen Wellock and I were talking about this. Have the plan, because if you have the plan and it's in the plan, then you have a likelihood of receiving funding for your work. And so that's why we talk about resilience planning and have historic preservation as part of it. All of the communities that I'm working with right now that are developing resilience plans have very strong historic preservation components as part of that plan. But you don't have to be a community. Again, you can come back to an individual property. I recently completed some work with Historic Annapolis. They developed using the D-Plan tool, which is an online disaster preparedness and response tool. It was developed by the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training and the Institute of Museum, Library, and Services. Terrific template for museums and cultural institutions to develop a disaster preparedness plan for their people, for their collections, for their facilities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the steps that we went through in Annapolis to understand how to prepare communities for disaster and for recovery. The first thing to look at, as we are typically comfortable with in the preservation sphere, is survey. So we conducted a vulnerability assessment. We surveyed our resources. We worked with the Army Corps of Engineers. They did flood elevation surveys of affected properties within our flood risk hazard area. We didn't have the ability to use the CR Surveyor Collector app tool. It wasn't available at that time. However, it is now. And I'd strongly encourage you to follow up with Megan and Stephanie and get more information about the CR Surveyor, because that is going to be the tool of the future, not only for survey, because as you can see, the FEMA has worksheets for vulnerability assessments, which we did the old-fashioned handwritten ones, but you really do have the opportunity when you're doing basic survey on buildings, even we did the intensive level survey, to collect information on vulnerability. And that is a key part of your survey work moving into the future where communities are hazard prone. But as I mentioned previously, also you need to understand the community's sentiment towards historic preservation and their priorities. That requires a number of community engagement tools, something we'll be talking about more in the modules on public engagement when you have a camp sponsored in your community. Economic assessment, there are factors to consider that FEMA provides you some guidance on, but again, we ground truthed all of those to understand how do we value loss to structures, to contents, to the function and use by an ice cream shop, for example, and what's the cost of displacement when your business or your residence has to relocate while repairs are underway. And then lastly, and I can't spend the time going through all of these unfortunately, but public engagement is so key. Podcasts have become a very strong, vital communication component. Story maps, getting the issues in the media, partnering. Army Corps of Engineers was a fabulous partner with us, as were our 3 state agencies, Department of Environment, Department of Planning, and our Department of Emergency Management. Open houses, town halls, charrettes, they all played a vital role, not just in technical assistance, but in funding. And the tools and resources that are out there, they go on and on and on. These toolkits that we're all creating for communities right now, we have so much wealth of information to pull from, but making sure it's preservation relevant is key. And so do stay in tune to the Main Street work and the NAPC work as we move forward, because we'll be providing information and toolkits like that for CLG communities to use. I won't talk about the disaster grants. They're out there. Obviously, part of planning is to ensure you're ready when disaster strikes, and that the fundings will be used in a prioritized manner. Beyond the Park Services funds, though, there is a new program, BRIC, which has come out by FEMA. It is a very competitive program. Immediately get in touch with your state hazard mitigation officer immediately and find out what projects qualify, because the announcement for funding opportunities is now out for that, as well as the standard flood mitigation assistance program offered through FEMA. We receive funding in Annapolis through the FMA program for our preparedness planning effort. In terms of materials and methods for disaster adaptation and rehab, we have obviously the flood adaptation guidance that has now been published by the National Park Service. And I understand maybe by the end of this year and beginning of next year, we'll see some illustrated versions of that. But great work by the 3 gens, and thanks very much to the National Park Service for providing that guidance. But many communities have already begun their design guidelines process. And so we've seen examples in Boston and in Charleston, as well as the Stockade Historic District in Schenectady, Georgetown, South Carolina, other communities. I like Schenectady's because of the importance of having illustrated guidelines and of the partnership with the SHPO. This was a very compelling quote. Right after Sandy, these guidelines were developed, and they have served as a good model for other communities. Nantucket has been looking at these, and right now we're in the process of updating their design guidelines. I know that there are probably some messages coming in the chat. I just would like to get through all of this, and we'll hit all of those. I apologize. There's just a lot of territory to cover here. Just so you know, as an HPC, we had the opportunity after we developed our Weather It Together plan to work with a property owner to inform him about the value of incorporating flood adaptation into his building project that came in front of the HPC. It was very simple, but it was really raised terraces that he wanted to develop, but we had them redesigned with perimeter planting beds in order to create basically a low profile barrier in the instance of tidal flooding, which is frequent. Very successful project, and it was an easy sell in our community because we had a plan in place, and he was very appreciative of the effort. So I'm going to close by talking about that. The fact is there is a role for the commission to play in disaster preparedness and recovery. We identify landmarks and buildings normally for designation, but also we need to identify them for their vulnerability to disasters. We review COAs for alterations and site improvements, but we need to start thinking about those changes in terms of future conditions. And we need to be able to be in a collaborative manner working with our city leadership to propose amendments to regulatory or planning tools to ensure that disaster management takes into account the unique circumstances and needs of historic properties to ensure their continued integrity. And lastly, I'd say we need to do, as we've learned from COVID, we need to adapt alternative meeting procedures within our rules of procedure, within our city's guidance relevant to public meetings, and have those ready and available in case we go back to live meetings, because disasters will require us to be nimble, to have quick approvals in some instances, and to be able to use the process as designed. So here is a list of all of the available trainings, and we are happy to talk with you about customizing these for your state or your particular historic preservation community that you're working with, or for any other instance that applies for or is relevant to our camp training. The contact information is there, director@napcommissions.org. That will get you to Marie or Stephanie at NAPC. And I want to thank you all very much. Just be prepared. It's Preparedness Month. And if I can answer any questions, glad to do so now. And also, if your community has any needs beyond a camp training, please do feel free to contact me at the Craig Group. And I will stop my share and open to questions or chat.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. And hopefully this, and Lisa, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what you just presented is what we're thinking of, kind of that overview piece.
Right. Yeah, this is the short version of the overview. The overview will typically last about 45 minutes or so, and with some Q&A time afterwards or longer. It just depends on the needs of the community, but we're very open to customizing, as we've done in the past, these camp modules to the specifics of the community needs.
Great, thank you. I think it's a lot of information. That's one thing.
It is.
Diving into this disaster thing, it's like,
yeah,
it's there's a lot of moving pieces as you track through it all. But
yeah.
Do y'all have any questions for Lisa, or thoughts on the topics that we kind of have to add to camp? So this will give you that diversity in camp. You could just do like the overview kind of piece as part of a regular camp or something like that. But we do find that the real important part of this is the preparation, you know, having it in your plan, and those are that CLG grants could pay for, or those types of things. So something to think about. Everyone's
Yeah, and I think we can offer this, Stephanie can chime in here if she'd like, but we talked about the fact that we could offer the overview as a webinar in anticipation of a much fuller camp, because design review, survey, public engagement tools, the various methods for adaptation that meet the Park Service's flood adaptation guidance. Those are all separate modules that dig much deeper into the details of how this can be done successfully around the country.
Right. So that's, we're looking at kind of with all of our camp, and especially with this new module, to have that overview to kind of get everybody kind of on the same page and have that background information, then be able to kind of dive in, like you say, to all the great content. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's very
They're all quiet. Somebody's got it.
stunned by all the
Give me a
information.
Oh, we're done.
I know it's a lot of information to cover.
Oh, well, do we want to talk a little bit about the timeline for some of this training? And Stephanie, maybe you covered that a little yesterday.
Yeah.
Kind of what we're.
Sure. No, because like I say, we're, we've gotten the modules, gotten the content and the framework for, each of the presentations to be having. And so, this fall and into next spring, we're going to be starting off kind of doing the initial presentations to the communities that have been affected by, the FIM and HIM disasters. And so working through that. With these are traditional camps, we've been splitting into 2 days. We may kind of frame this more as, kind of a 1 day, because we with the different modules. So we're going to be looking at that, but we'll work with the individual communities on what fits best. But it will be along the same vein as our traditional camp and our full day camp. And so that's what we're doing, and be working with the individual, the states that they're working with that. I think we also, I believe, on your end, kind of looking at how the states will determine which CLGs or who will be the host and the needs. So that is something we'll be looking at. And so we could be meeting with each of the states, like I say, through this fall, kind of getting maybe 1 or 2 of those out, and then really kicking it off, as well in the spring. But no, now that forum's done, we're ready to do some more training.
And I think, Megan, I think the reason we're having this presentation to the CLGs is because we really want them to take advantage of this. This is something that the Park Service is providing as a free resource, correct? This is not something, normally our camps, we do charge for these, but in this particular instance, it's so critical to get this information out that we appreciate the fact that Park Service is able to offer this training and informational presentation just to get this moving in terms of incorporating disaster training into how CLGs operate.
Yeah, and for those of you that are those CLG coordinators that are in a hurricane affected state right now, not current, past, we do, as part of this agreement and also with Main Street, we've set aside funding to pay for those camps. So this will be, and we talked about that a little bit on your disaster calls, but this will be, so you're getting the heads up or the first look at what that's going to be. So then work with Stephanie and to kind of set those up and how you want to do them. And like Stephanie said, thinking about what makes sense. Is it part of it as your statewide conference for all your CLGs, or is it we target certain communities? You may want to do a different type of kind of training or camp in a community that was harder hit by one of the hurricanes or needs more in that kind of line of disaster preparedness and training. And then you may have, an Annapolis or a St. Augustine that's very advanced. So we want to kind of, you could tailor that kind of training for them. And then for the rest of the states, these are all, new training features that'll be available hopefully fairly soon, that y'all can tap into as well, and using your CLG funds to do a camp like you normally do, because the disaster funding unfortunately is very focused to only work in those areas that were affected. So that's kind of the target.
Megan, Ruben had a question in regards to can this be used beyond CLG communities? So in other words, if you've got non-CLG communities or main streets, can this program operate there?
Yes, definitely with the disaster funding, because this is not just CLG funding. If you're using certified local government funding to bring one of these in, then we'd probably need to target that. But you can always, I mean, if you have it, host it in a CLG and you want to invite other communities, that's not something we're going to police or so.
And what he suggests too is this, you know, a seed to facilitate greater local involvement in preservation. So I think that is a way to, you know, kind of loop, you know, the non-CLGs and those communities in with, you know, current CLGs.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
So we may see this expand beyond CLGs. It's just that funding source kind of controls where it is. But Ruben, your other question was how does it be coordinated by the SHPO? So we have disaster calls each month. That sounds terrible, a disaster call, and talk with the states. So it's probably for you in Florida, it's Sarah, your grant manager, that's probably been on most of those. But that's a really good question because it sounds like we probably need to do one of those calls more with the CLG, you know, your group from there, because you're the ones more involved in the community training and that type of thing. So we'll definitely look at setting that up to talk more about the details of how to plan one when we get ready for that, if that makes sense.
And what I can, you know, once we kind of get the key contact, kind of get a team in place of, you know, because like there's, you know, different people are in charge of different things in each state. So as we work through that, to have the team for planning, I think that would be helpful. You know, because sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's a different person. So determining who's best. So yeah, I'm excited. And many thanks to Lisa for all of her work.
No, this has been great. And just remember this, we can do all of this on Zoom if we need to, so don't hesitate. I mean, we'll make this work for every community. We've got trainers that we're bringing on board. Some are SHPOs, some work in CLGs. So we've got the people in our camp training bench to be able to handle this. And I'm sorry, I've got to leave. And
That's
John,
fine. Thank you, Lisa.
but I'm sure we'll have all of this online later. We can take a look at it. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Bye.
And that is kind of one thing that we're talking about now, or are kind of adding to your trainer arsenal. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Like if all of you know of people that have a lot of good disaster experience or might be a good qualified trainer. Right.
Right. So that's Lisa said, we do have a great arsenal, and I spoke of trainers. I guess that's the word, arsenal. Yeah.
It's a little. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Stephanie froze on us, or I froze. Okay.
Stephanie, can you hear us?
Yeah, I think Stephanie froze.
Okay. Anyway, I'll just try to fill in for Stephanie here. We are kind of, you know, I think one of the good things about the camp program is they're always looking at kind of adding and interviewing new camp trainers, and they do go through quite a vetting process. But we have been talking about if there are some trainers or possible trainers that you think particularly you've seen give really good disaster training or have that kind of experience, if you would let either me or Stephanie know, that might be an option for us to add to the current group, the current arsenal, yeah, that we have. Okay, last chance for any questions on disaster stuff. I was looking to see if Serena has joined us. Has she? Nope. Okay.
Not yet. I'm watching out for her.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
She's here. Hold on one second.
Oh, she hears? Oh, great. Great.
Yep.
So,
Serena, we're going to promote you to host. Give me 1 second.
Serena Bellew is my boss and our new fairly year deputy associate director. So she was going to pop in and say hello to y'all this morning, and so we'll let her get her camera turned on and her mic turned on, and we'll let her say hello. Hi.
Okay, can you all hear me?
We can.
Sorry, I'm not as adept at Zoom as I am with some of the other platforms. Hi, everybody. good to virtually see you all. And I apologize that I'm joining in sort of halfway through the second day. But I'm very happy to be able to at least pop in and say hello to everybody. You know, the certified local government programs are things that I, in the ideal world, would have so much more time to work with and focus on, because I sort of feel like you're the total opposite of what my job is, in that I'm in the ivory tower of Washington, DC, of the so often hypothetical and or at best policy decisions, and you all are there really doing the tough stuff and working with actual communities and actual resources and programs. And so, you know, I did want to sort of convey that I have an immense respect for all of you, for the work that you do and the perspective you bring. And I'm a little envious of that. And I'm sure Megan could agree with me in this respect, that we don't get to see the real stuff and the actual resources and cities and towns and counties that, you know, are dealing with trying to balance all the things that make being a certified local government challenging, as near as much as we would like to, and certainly not right now with our you know, pretty much non-existent travel capabilities at this time. But I'm so glad that Stephanie and Corey and Megan's staff have been able to at least have an opportunity to talk to all of you, albeit virtually, not as good as in person, and hopefully we'll be able to do some in-person stuff again at some point in the future. I certainly will appreciate it all the more when we get to that point. And I get to learn from Megan and her staff, and certainly from Stephanie and Corey all the time, and I really do appreciate everybody's work. CLGs is part of Megan's portfolio, which is pretty big, which is part of my portfolio, which is pretty big, and so it definitely is it's nice to be able to focus just on this one particular area. And again, I'm always incredibly appreciative of the work that everybody does at the local level, because it's really where everything happens, and we can, you know, we in the federal government can initiate all the programs and initiatives we like, but so often it really relies on the dedication and the enthusiasm of the people at the local levels, like all of you, who really get things done. So if Megan hasn't told you this already, which I'm sure she probably has, we really appreciate all the work you guys do, because we certainly couldn't do our jobs without that. And, you know, I've worked for 2 different SHPOs at this point, and I think I can safely say that they can't do their jobs without your help as well. So I hope that the 2 days of content, you know, that you're going through right now is useful, and I'm certainly more than happy to try and help out in any way I can. I am notoriously terrible for taking ages to get back to people, as Megan can attest to, because of just the level of stuff we have to deal with in DC. But I would certainly be more than happy to participate or do something in the future if I can be of any help. I think, Megan, you were saying this while I was getting keyed in to being on camera, but, you know, Megan's group is one of the programs under me, but I also have the National Register of Historic Places and the National Historic Landmark Program and the Historic Tax Credit Program and the American Battlefield Protection Program and the Habs Hair House Historic Documentation Program. So, you know, if you ever have any need for questions or input or anything from any of those programs, certainly you can reach out to me directly or to Megan or to Stephanie, and we can, you know, do our very best to participate, because I think it's good for all of the programs to be able to have that interaction down at the community level. So with that, I will let you get back to the proper conversations on hand, unless Megan, do you want me to add anything else, or Stephanie?
No, I think that's,
No, I just get to wave and say hello, and
yeah, you get the easy job.
yeah, definitely. I've totally admitted. So I hope to meet you all properly at some point, and you know, do have a great rest of the training, and see you all hopefully one of these days in real life. So
We hope. All right, thank you, Serena.
bye.
And Megan, Stephanie's back on.
Okay,
Just one
great.
second.
Okay. So I think our next trick will be to switch over to